A different disaster was affecting Lake Michigan. From the day the first canal bypassing Niagara Falls opened back in 1829, exotic species had been making their way into the Great Lakes. The aliens have ranged from the microscopic to the hard to miss, like these mussel shells. But they've had one thing in common: they wreak havoc on the natives. A few introductions were fairly benign and even beneficial. Smelt, or schmelt as many of us call them, arrived in 1923, and catching them in dip nets was a rite of spring for generations of Great Lakes families. Smelting was a free source of fresh and abundant protein for years until populations crashed in the 1990s. Smelt were considered beneficial, but other introductions were anything but. Sea lamprey arrived in 1936 and touched off a cascade of events. The lamprey preyed on lake trout, causing their populations to nosedive. When the alewife, a type of herring, arrived in 1949, it took over without a fight. Alewives died off in huge numbers every summer and piled up on area beaches, where their rotting corpses created a huge odor problem. Popular beaches like Bradford were practically unusable. And so we imported salmon to control the alewives, beginning with the coho in 1966. Today we have the patently absurd situation of an introduced predator feeding on introduced prey, and even that balancing act seems to be coming unglued. Other aliens arrived in the ballast water of ocean ships. Round gobies, natives of the Black Sea, have disrupted the food chain in the open lake. Zebra mussels made their mark, and in recent years they've been displaced by quagga mussels, which have colonized the lake bottom from near shore to the greatest depths. One result is improved water clarity. The mussels are filter feeders. As they take nutrients out of the water, light penetrates to a greater depth. Divers who could once see barely 6 feet ahead now have great visibility, but it comes at a great price. Not only do layers of mussels coat everything from shipwrecks to water intakes, they devour the plankton that native fish depend on, and they excrete it as a phosphate-rich waste that acts as a fertilizer. The combination of more light and abundant fertilizer has fueled an explosion of cladophora algae, which can bloom and wash ashore in appalling quantities. The rotting algae has fouled favorite beaches up and down the entire coast of Lake Michigan. Now Asian carp are knocking on our door by way of the Illinois River system, and they may even have crossed the threshold. What we've done over the decades is turn Lake Michigan into a giant science fair experiment. The only prizes we're going to win are for negligence, malfeasance, and a willful ignorance of the impact of our species. Bad as they are, invasives are just one threat to the well-being of our lakes and rivers. Our waterways are imperiled by what we put into them, from road salt to pesticides, and by what might be taken out of them. Should the city of Waukesha, in a different watershed, be allowed to tap Lake Michigan to replace its radium-laced drinking water? And what'll happen when the American West really runs dry? If the U.S. can import oil all the way from Saudi Arabia, it certainly wouldn't be hard for the West to drain water from the Great Lakes. When Arizona is finally parched, when California comes calling, will we have the resolve? Will we even have the power to say no? The challenges can seem overwhelming, but the news is by no means all bad. With passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972, protecting the resource became, for the first time in our history, a national priority. Milwaukee's major response was the Deep Tunnel Project. Nearly 30 miles of underground chambers that store raw sewage until it can be pumped out for treatment. Operational in 1993, the deep tunnel hasn't ended overflows, but it allows the sewers district to capture more than 98% of Greater Milwaukee's wastewater. Better treatment, tighter controls, and greater public awareness have led to cleaner water and a more appealing river. People want to be on the water again. What had been an eyesore has become a magnet. Look at the Milwaukee Riverwalk. Instead of the covered Grand Boulevard proposed in the 1920s, we have a continuous walkway that hugs the river for nearly 2 miles, dotted with restaurants, night spots, and public art. The Riverwalk has brought Milwaukeeans back to the river in droves. Just upstream, along Commerce Street, coal piles line the riverbank for decades. Now those very same banks are lined with condos, including some of the most expensive in Milwaukee. What's happened on Commerce is nothing less than a transformation. Just beyond Commerce Street, one dam after another have blocked the river at North Avenue since 1843. The latest version was removed in 1997. Restoring the upper river to its natural channel for the first time in 150 years. That set the stage for the Milwaukee River Greenway. As vegetation returned to the banks, a coalition worked to protect nearly 900 acres of land along the river. What had been an in-town water park for our ancestors has become a priceless environmental corridor. With hiking and biking trails, native plantings, and a spirit of wilderness rarely found so close to the heart of a major city. As native plants came back after the dam opened, so have native wildlife. There were once only 8 species of fish above the North Avenue Dam, most of them carp and goldfish. Now there are nearly 40. And with the opening of the fish passage at Thiensville, they can swim their way miles farther, passing a fish cam as they clear the dam. The Milwaukee River would not be mistaken for a Class A trout stream, but the trout are there. And so are the sturgeon. I'm at Sturgeon Fest in Lakeshore State Park, the annual culmination of efforts to restore this ancient native to its home waters. This little guy, I think I'll name him Francis, or her Francis, is one of 1,100 sturgeon that were raised upstream at River Edge Nature Center in partnership with the Wisconsin DNR. They're all being released today. The hope is that they'll return to the Milwaukee River when it's time to spawn 20 or 30 years from now. Releasing Francis here is an act of faith in our future, and it would have been unthinkable before recent improvements in the river's water quality. Here you go, Francis. Good luck, little buddy. I hope my kids have a chance to meet your kids.